as I did, is saying, okay, Canfor, you want to shut down your mills? I'm prepared to buy it. I make you an offer on that mill. And then they say, no, that one, and then on and on and on and on. In the meantime, they become log brokers.
Yeah. Well, let me be very clear in terms of where I stand. If you have fiber and you're not using it, we're coming for it.
Exactly.
It should be used. It should be used. Because here's the issue. We talk about the threat of tariffs. We talk about the threat of Donald Trump. Wildfires is just as big of a threat as Donald Trump these days. No question about it. And so that fiber that just sits there, before a logger can get to it and harvest it, a wildfire will come in and just decimate it. In 2023, the worst wildfire season on record, we lost 20 years worth of harvestable fiber all across British Columbia.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting On the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, British Columbia, an absolutely beautiful, beautiful province. We are in the northern part of British Columbia. Everybody knows about Vancouver, the big city. We are 500 miles north of Vancouver, or for our European friends, 800 kilometers. And Prince George in the region is a beautiful area, lots of forest all around us. Within 50 miles of Prince George, we have 100 lakes, and we have lots of friends here, black bears, grizzly bears, caribou, deer, you name it, we have it all, living in harmony with nature. Today, a very, very, very special podcast because we have a special on the BC forest industry in crisis. It's been a difficult time for us collectively, and it is an honor to have the Honorable Minister of Forest of the Province of British Columbia, Ravi Parmar, here as a guest. And Ravi has an amazing career, actually. He is one of the youngest ministers. I can call you 30 years old.
30 years old, you got it.
Can you believe it? And he is from the riding of, I believe it is, I know it is close to, and I'm trying to find it, the riding, maybe...
Langford Highlands.
Langford Island. And that's a special riding for me because we also spend time on, not only in northern British Columbia, where I do a lot of manufacturing, but also I have a place in North Saanich. And a good friend of mine, John Oregon, had the same in the same region, right next, and he was your mentor.
He sure was. We still call it Langford John Defuca from time to time. We tried to change the name of the riding. Elections BC didn't appreciate it, but absolutely.
I found him an amazing individual. And unfortunately, he passed away in the last 6 months, 8 months or so. And so unfortunate, and but again, he was a very, very special individual. So you now are, you have had a history of being involved already young in a number of areas. So tell us a little bit about your education and your background, and then you have very early, you became involved in politics, and then obviously then got elected as the MLA for the riding, and then got a number of portfolios, or fairly early, and then became Minister of Forest here. How long ago about it?
Yeah, about almost 6 months ago.
6 months ago. Yeah.
Well, thanks, John. I appreciate you having me on. This is a true pleasure. What an opportunity and a platform you have built from bottom up to allow people to come and talk, not just about forestry, but a whole host of issues. So truly an honor. My connection to politics started relatively young. My parents were healthcare workers in the early 2000s, HEU employees. And, my parents came from India. They immigrated in the early 90s. I admire the $25.47 story because it's so similar to my family, right? My parents came here. I was born here in Canada, but they came here dirt poor, worked in the farms. They came from Punjab, which was an agricultural district in India, came here, picked berries. My grandmother worked on the farms for 7 years before coming homes to care for me. so my parents could continue working. But it wasn't until the early 2000s when my parents both lost their jobs to privatization in the healthcare that I started really even paying attention to politics. Now, I was about 6 years old, so I don't know how much one would pay attention to politics at that age. But I remember being on the picket line, and I remember following politics. Let's just say Gordon Campbell wasn't my favorite politician.
Right.
But it wasn't until a few years later where I was an elementary student, Millstream Elementary in Langford. I was in grade 5. My teacher was doing an assignment on the political election in 2005. As you'll remember, at that point, the BC NDP had 2 seats. They were almost decimated.
Yeah.
The Liberals had, I think, 77 seats. Like
Controlled it.
Yeah, totally. And even more so than controlled. They could do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was doing a project on the election. I was so interested in seeing the signs go up, the debates, the discussion on the news. My dad and I used to watch the news every night just to get a feel of what was going on.
Right.
And I was a bit of a keener. And so I went to my teacher. We handed in our assignment. And I said, what could I do to get extra credit? And she's like, well, why don't you invite the person who wins in your riding to your class? And they may say no. They may be busy. They're busy people. But let's see what they say. And you can interview them in front of the class. I was 10 years old at the time, grade 5 student. That person was John Horgan.
Yeah.
Reached out to him.
Amazing.
He showed up, and a lifelong friendship started after that.
He was one of those kind of guys. Right?
He was.
He was a people person, right? A unique individual.
Right from the beginning.
Yeah.
The John Horgan I met in 2005 was the same John Horgan I last saw just a week before his death.
Yeah. Unbelievable. I can call you Ravi.
You
right?
sure can.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, Ravi, and then, so what then happened is you got involved with obviously you're part of the NDP party, and then you did a number of positions within the organization, and then you got the call to become Minister of Forests.
Yeah, I'll give you kind of the Reader's Digest version.
Yeah.
I was the chair of my school board for about 10 years. Education is my passion.
Yeah.
I went to an old decrepit high school. When it fell apart, duct tape was put on the floor to hold it together. And so I started a petition, gained a lot of interest, helped secure funding for 2 new schools in my community. Made the decision a couple of years into university because I was getting bored of just listening to politics and wanted to participate in myself, and got elected to the local school board, became the youngest chair in Canada.
In BC, Canada.
At the time.
How old were you then?
I was 20.
20? Oh my God.
Yeah. Who would have thought? Well, I was chair when I was 22, trustee when I was 20.
Yeah.
But the people around me gave me an opportunity, and so continued that. Worked for John as one of his constituency assistants, and then when I graduated from university, continued being a school trustee and board chair, and started working in government. And one of my first files was the Ministry of Forests.
Yeah.
I was tasked to work alongside the other Ravi, Ravi Kalon, when he was the parliamentary secretary.
Yeah.
And we traveled from community to community, talking to workers, to community leaders like yourself. And back then, you'll remember 2018, 2019, significant amount of mill closures and curtailments all across the province.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a kid from Langford. I didn't know forestry. I didn't know rural BC at that time. So that was an eye-opening experience.
Yeah.
And I learned so much. I think of the relationships I built on the ground. I think of Joan Atkinson from Mackenzie.
Yeah.
That community's lost 5 mills just in the last almost 2 decades. I think of the community of Merritt, which is down to 1 mill.
Yeah.
I think of Fort St. James, which is starting to recover, but isn't what it used to be.
Yeah. Fort Nelson, Fort St. John.
Totally. Totally. All those communities. It pulled at my heartstrings, John, in a way that I never thought it would.
Yeah.
And so 6 months ago, I sat at a table like this one, right across from the Premier, and I did something that some would argue is political suicide.
Yeah.
And that is ask the Premier to make me BC's Minister of Forests.
Yeah.
And he did. And 6 months later, still got a smile on my face.
Yeah. So, and probably even at that point, although you were quite informed, you had no idea as that would happen next, right up into today, where we are talking about tariffs and on and on and on. And then, with all due respect to our friends down south, the Americans, which are our friends and close allies, and getting caught in the politics from there, it took us even further to where we are today. And today is important because you are in Prince George, in particular the Council of Forestry Industries has their AGM in Prince George right now, and probably 600 people there or something like that. And everybody is looking at where do things go from here, and what will they look like. And so from my perspective, just to it's an important time for me in a number of ways. That I'm a little bit older than you. I was born in November the 1st, 1940.
Another November guy. I like that. November 15th.
In northeastern Holland, and about 10-15 minutes from the border. And my mom and dad fell in love in 1938, got married, and they were living in paradise. My dad had a job at a lumber mill. They rented this beautiful house fairly quickly, had a boy and a girl, my sister and my brother, and then my mom was pregnant with me, and then this dictator Adolf Hitler decided that Poland should become part of Germany and started pushing east, and then the danger was that the rest of Europe would become invaded by the Germans, and so my dad was called into the Dutch army in April of 1940, and then was the last time they heard from him when he was caught in the bombing of Rotterdam. And so that killed thousands of people, and Hitler did that because they didn't capitulate quick enough for his likes, so he's bombed the center of Rotterdam, a big major city. And so the first thing that I remember of the war, then from thereafter, for 5 years, they would not know if my dad had survived or was still alive. And so the first thing that I remember is bombers overhead, and then the other part that I remember is they cut off all the food supply in 1944, the hunger period, and so again, a lot of kids died, a lot of people vulnerable, older age died, and every morning my brother, my sister, and myself, we went with gunny sacks into the railroad yard, picked up anything edible and burnable, and then and the reason that we did as kids, because the Germans wouldn't shoot us, they put us one in the back, but then we would be back, and regardless. And then we were liberated and saw far too much that we should not have seen. As a result, PTSD is still very much part of me, the inner child is. And so we were liberated and that's why this is important for me, in the next week and a half. Then at April the 12th, 1945, we were liberated by the Canadian Army, and it left such an impression on me that I always knew that was my dream. At 5 years old, I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada, and I tried to go when I was 17. My dad, my parents wouldn't let me then, and saying it was too young. And then I went when I was 24, and in the meantime, I had my grandfather was a master carpenter. My dad worked in lumber. I started working in lumber quite early because academically I was not a success story. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times, and then they said, "What are you going to do with this guy? Maybe send him to the mentally challenged school." He said, "No, we're not going to do that. So let's find him a job." At 12 and a half in a furniture factory. So that's what I did. At 12 and a half, I became working in a furniture factory with the objective of getting me to become a furniture maker, which I did. And then that would allow me to work with my hands because I obviously didn't have the other talents that he required.
Well, I doubt that very much. Doubt that very much.
But that's what I did. And then the dream was always there. The other part of the dream, Ravi, was that I wanted to prove to me not to anybody else, but to me, that I was just as smart as anybody else, and that I had the opportunity to do. I loved lumber, and I was going to go to Canada, start with nothing, and to build my own lumber mill. That was my dream.
Yeah.
And so I did that in July of 1965. I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and then I counted my money. So then I flew into Montreal, took the train across Canada, 4 days, 5 nights. My God, that is a long way to go.
That is a long. We're a big country.
Yeah, and so we landed in Vancouver, and so then I couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job, so I went to the immigration department there, and fortunately there was a German fellow, I could speak some German, and I told him, but I wanted to build a lumber mill. He said, Prince George, go to Prince George, July 1965. And so I came to Prince George. My God, 13 hours in the Greyhound. The Greyhound station, we can still see it here where it used to be, about 3 blocks away. And I came off the bus. I had my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. I had $25.47. But what I had lots of attitude. I always been positive, passion. No matter what I do, I give it 125%. Work ethic. And so I work harder, even now at nearly 84 and a half. I work harder than anybody. I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late. But the other part about it is, Ravi, that a lot of people do not know is that I had this passion for the lumber industry. I had that in Holland. I got exposure to it, spent some time in Sweden before I came here, and then worked as a furniture maker. And when I came here and I looked at the forest that we have here, and I was used to Holland as not much forest, but I spent time in Sweden, and the forest is very similar to that what we have here as it is there, and I could not believe the amount of fiber that was going up the burner chain into the burners. I couldn't believe it. And I worked as a cleanup man, then a lumber piler, and then within a year and a half I was supervisor and then superintendent of one of the larger mills here. After a year and a half, that didn't go fast enough for me because I want to get a mill. So I had an opportunity to manage a mill, a small mill. As I managed it, I would get 1/3 ownership of it. Where was it, John? It was in Watson Lake, Yukon. Of all places. Now, I'm from Holland originally, and if you ask me, what is the climate in Holland? Well, I say the rain is colder in the wintertime. That's, you know, Watson Lake, I saw 62 below, and run the sawmill there for 5 years, owned a motel, owned a property, and all the other kinds.
If you didn't think you were tough, then Yukon made you even tougher.
Exactly. So and so from there on in, that didn't quite work out in the partnership. They didn't want to do what I wanted to do. Came back to Prince George, and then again worked for one of the larger mills here. And then from there on in, with $25,000 from the bank, I started Brink Forest Products with the dream of a value-added manufacturing plant, and then that's what I did 50 years ago. 50.
What an incredible story.
Got no handouts, no subsidies, nothing. You know what the biggest challenge was all along, right from the beginning? Access to fiber. It's not that we didn't want to pay for it, but the simple issue was always the same and still is, respectfully, today.
Yeah, it sure is.
And so then the other part, so that was the case then, and I still believe, you know, that, and that's why I'm so active in it. I was the founding president of the BC Council of Value-Added Wood Processors in 1992, 93, and so 800 companies around British Columbia, 8 associations, and most of them are gone now, maybe 25% left of it at maximum.
Well, and you were vice chair of Kofi too, because that's how we first met.
I was the vice, but then the other one, I was the chair of the Woodworks Initiative.
That's right.
When that started, and then I was the longest serving member of Kofi, 40 years as on the board, and then I was the vice chair of Kofi. And then, so with Kofi, I left them, I believe, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And the reason for it simply was that as you have, I have a passion for the industry. I believe that we are immensely blessed with the location that we have, with the province of British Columbia, the fiber that we grow here, even today, although we have challenges, the fiber will grow, the opportunities are still there and will present itself. But the position of the major association, in particular Kofi, I'm not here to beat up on them, but I want to make sure that it is understood as the record, is that the objective of Kofi has always been, they have 2 or 3 big companies that control it. They're the biggest do-pays, so obviously they do. And still today is where a half a dozen companies control about 20 million cubic meters of the forest in British Columbia, but do not do much manufacturing. So that's where the issue is today. I try to go from where we are, buy those mills, and so what would you do, John, different than they do? Well, rather than making dimension lumber and forcing it into the chain, I suggest, as I did with, again, John Oregon, when I remember John making, I think it was 2019, when Kofi had a convention in Vancouver, and he made it clear, put everybody in shock.
Oh, he sure did. I was there in that room.
Were you there? And
yeah.
I was there. And he said, these are the changes that will take place. Old growth is one. Involvement of First Nations is the other one. The other one is value-added manufacturing. Unless it is changed and you become more proactive in addressing those issues, we will make the changes. It was a shock to the industry. The next thing that happened the following year, I think it was 21, 22, when he announced the intentions paper. And so he had labor commenting on the announcement. He had First Nations, and then somebody from industry, and I presume there were all kinds, but there's nobody. So it was me. And what I said is that I believe, and I still believe that today, the direction of the industry is that I see huge opportunities even today. Is it because the forest is here, the location is here, the infrastructure is here. We have so many benefits, but it's controlled by too few companies that have decided that this is not the place. So what I said is the future is, and that's why I made offers on these mills. What do I do different than they do? I say innovative. What I see is in the forest industry, innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary. What is innovative primary? We have to go introduce more technology. Probably less people will get involved, and there must be more in regional, local areas where the wood is harvested. And then the other part is that although it will employ less people, that up to 50% of the lumber being manufactured has to go up the value chain. 25% of the higher grades, 25% of the lower grades. And that's how I see the future. The danger is there, and this reminds me back on what you were saying. In 2005, up to that point, we were actively, as the Brink Forest Products and many others, very actively involved in value-added manufacturing. And what would happen then is that the government of the day had decided that we should find new markets for our products rather than the United States. And China has opportunities, and Japan and all the other places. But they did not really, respectfully, realize, and the danger is there, we're going in the same direction again. They gave money to set up offices in those locations managed by Kofi and others, the BC Lumber Trade Council, which is basically Kofi. But what China wants, they're bottom feeders.
Raw logs.
Only logs or low-grade lumber. That's all they want. So all the low-grade lumber disappeared, went to China. And the high grades mainly go to Japan. And to again go do it the same thing all over again, that's all they want. That's all that's going to happen. I say to you, as you do with passion, and I want some of the statements that you make, is I say to the public, open your door. The future is here in BC.
Well said.
We must add more social and economic value here in the regions. And if I look at communities like Fort Nelson, Fort St. John, Bear Lake, Mackenzie, Fraser Lake, Houston, Vanderhoof, and I can go on and on and on and on and on. I say no more. And so that, and still, I realize that, we have challenges, obviously. I'm a supporter of UNDRIP, the First Nations being involved. And we are in negotiations with a number of First Nation groups on working together. And the one in particular that we are working closely with is the Wet'suwet'en group and their chiefs, the hereditary chiefs, and looking at potentially building a mill in Houston and buying the operation in Vanderhoof, but so far we have no response from really other than council say, no, we want more money. And so,
look, John, let me say a couple things.
Yeah.
The one thing that I think you should add to this plaque is hustle. It's one thing I appreciate so much. It makes me proud to be a British Columbian, is I see from you and so many people the hustle of coming in here, being pushed down, being told no, being told to wait, and you keep fighting. I have mad respect for that. And you're absolutely right. If there's one thing that I've realized is we've dropped the ball these last couple of decades. My government is not perfect on forestry by any means. Premier Eby would be the first to admit that. If John was still here, he'd be able to admit that. Now, the early 2000s, there were some significant policy changes. The end to appurtenancy just being one of them. That really caused the challenges. But, to be fair, I am very critical of John Rustad, as you will know well, and rightfully so to an extent. But pine beetle kill wasn't his fault. Wildfires wasn't his fault. All of that attached with really poor policy has created the mechanism for what you call a forest industry in crisis today.
And so I have had John Rustad sitting there in your chair, and I'm not politically involved in any way, is saying, okay, what is your policy? He said, in regards to allocation of tenure, he said, use it or lose it. And so it's as simple as that from my perspective as saying, okay, so that's the opposition. I believe what I've seen so far from your government and Premier Hibby's government is I'm encouraged by them, and I'm excited about you being involved because you have the passion that I have. Is saying we realize how fortunate that we are, but at the same time we have to realize that with all due respect to Kofi, I left them because their policy was, when we started the acceleration program, that was bringing industry and value added together to see if we can interact with making fiber available. That did not happen. And so that's my view on it.
I've got all the time in the world for companies like yours that make the investment in BC. I recognize how challenging it has been these last number of years to invest dollars in our forest industry here in BC. But you, even during these challenging times, have invested here in BC.
Yes.
Still
want to.
I think of tons of other companies that still want to and have. I think of Hampton Lumber in Fort St. James, brand new, world-class sawmill. I think of the work that Greg Stewart does. A lot of these are family-based companies.
And Carrier and Dunkley.
Totally.
And I like that. The problem that I had with when I said enough, I cannot stay in Kofi, is when they made this in the first meeting of the acceleration initiative, is that the statements that were made by some of the directors, and I'm not going to name names, that's not why we're here, saying that timber belongs to us, the primaries, and no one is going to tell us who we sell the lumber to, no matter what the price is. And I said, at that point, as the vice chair of Kofi, I said, I'm here, take my hat off as the vice chair of Kofi. I'm here as a value-added manufacturer. At that point, I said, we may as well go home. Because if that is your position, which it was and still is, in my opinion, so then what's the purpose?
Well, look, I would say I get a lot of criticism in terms of my role as Minister of Forest. As one can expect, we are facing challenges. But I often remind people, and I'm a pretty blunt person.
I like that.
I blame John Horgan, my mentor, for that. But I think people appreciate it as well, is look in the mirror. We talk about the challenges of access to fiber. Access to fiber has been the long-standing issue for decades, as you've said it. And we've lost the social license. You look at a town like Mackenzie, where fiber leaves on trucks. I was just in Mackenzie last week. Yeah. Fiber leaving. I think of Fort St. John, where a mill is closed, but there is still a lot of fiber out there. A lot of fiber out there. And so
Houston.
Houston, another example.
Yeah. And we have an operation in Houston.
You do?
A value-added operation. Mm-hmm. We have a value-added operation in Vanderhoof, and one in Prince George. I'm desperately going on my knees looking for wood, not for the purpose that I want cheaper wood. We pay market price, but somehow we are still not there.
One of the core principles, John, I've got a review of BC timber sales happening right now. I've got my team in the Forest Service doing a whole host of work on tenures and pricing. And one thing that lives in my mind as a core principle for me is local logs, local jobs.
Right.
That's my commitment to British Columbians. It's my commitment to workers. If there's one thing I want to do over the course of my time as BC's Minister of Forest, is I want to make our forest sector the most people-focused forest sector in the entire world.
Right.
And I want to use innovation. I want to use the future. I want us to really start thinking outside of 4-year election cycles and think 7 generations ahead. If there's one thing that drives me crazy is the boom and bust of our forest sector.
Yeah.
I'm tired of that. People on the ground are tired of that. We have to build for stability. We have to build for workers. And to those companies that have reaped the benefits here in British Columbia in good times, especially with high lumber prices, and decide to take that investment elsewhere, I got very little time for that. Very little time for that. I will make time, and I will prioritize time for any company who continues to invest in BC. And so when you talk about losing that social license, losing that relationship with the Indigenous peoples, the first peoples of this land, that's how you do that. And we're going to put a stop to it. Yeah. Whether it's through the review of BC timber sales that we're doing, we're going to prioritize local logs for local jobs. We're going to take a number of steps. I'm going to outline today just a couple of steps in terms of commercial thinning as a prime opportunity for us. I think we need to do a better job managing our forests. There's one story that lives with me. I was in the Cheslada First Nations territory up in Burns Lake, and Chief Karina Lewis was kind enough to take me on a helicopter and fly me over her traditional territory. Almost 50%, John, has been burnt in wildfires in the last decade. Some of the timber harvesting land base, some private land, lots of parkland. And as we were flying over, she pointed down and she said, "Minister, do you know what that is?" Just an area that was burnt. I have to tell you, it's one thing to drive through an area that's burnt. It's another to fly over it. Holy smokes.
Yeah.
That was an old growth management area.
Yeah.
And she said, because that old growth management area is locked up, we couldn't go in there and properly steward the land. Exactly. And so what happened? Wildfire came in, no more old growth.
Yeah.
And so we have to do a better job taking care. I was in Clearwater just a couple of weeks ago, and Wells Great Provincial Park, the Europeans that were coming in to visit in that park said, come on, guys, you have tons of trees here. Rake your damn forests. Do a better job taking care of your forests. And so that is going to be a key principle in my work as Minister of Forest. It's going to be a top priority. And today, later today at Kofi, I'm going to lay out how we get there. And it's not just about permitting. We have to do a better job in permitting. I want to cut the paperwork for permitting in half. Right now, it takes about 40 days once an application is submitted to get approved. I told my team last week that our new benchmark is 25 days. You got 2 days to figure it out. Yep. And they did. April 1st, 25-day benchmark. Yep. That's our goal. I'd love to get to a point where it's 2 weeks. We have to drive forest landscape planning tables. We have to do a better job. I'm bundling permits in a district office right now, archaeology and cutting permits, to create efficiency. And if that works, I'm going to roll it out the entire province. You're going to see, from my time as minister, more action taken. I launched this review of BC timber sales, and I said if there's one thing I want to accomplish with, I don't want, you've seen enough government
Yeah.
reviews, John, in your time watching governments of all stripes. Usually what happens is a minister appoints a panel, they go and conduct a review for a year, a fancy report is assembled, and then it just lives on someone's back shelf.
And nothing happens.
And nothing happens. So
Now,
this
with
review,
BCTS, when do you see that happening? You're doing a review right now. There's a date here fairly quickly by
the end of June, the entire review is going to be done. Yeah. It's going to be the most efficient review the Forest Service has ever done. I'm going to lay out just some of the announcements. One of the ones that I'm going to be talking about today is our auction system. Right now, we have way too many no bids. And it costs us so much money and time to keep putting up bids. So we have to strengthen that process. We have to get fiber flowing in a much more efficient way. I've got an incredible team. George Abbott, former BC Liberal Cabinet Minister. I used to lobby him as a kid, and so he's a good friend of mine. Lenny Joe, First Nations Forestry Council, Brian Frankel, 3 incredible British Columbians that are helping to advise me. And I told them, don't have anything in your calendar for the next 6 months. We're going to get this done. We're going to help use BCTS to transform this whole forest sector.
Get value-added opinions involved as well. There's not much structure to value-added anymore in the province because of all these things. But and northern BC is always delicate because politically we don't, the coast so the representation is not as you would like it to be. But still, the future is in the north.
It is. I agree with you. I think the future is all across British Columbia, but I think there's huge opportunity
in particular.
It's why I made the first decision I made as minister on day one of launching this review was to dedicate more fiber to Category 4. I doubled it. And I did it because I could, and it was the right thing to do. I want to get more fiber to value-added operators like yours. I want to make sure that we use every ounce of that tree possible. Because we haven't had a chance to talk about tariffs, but that has to be one of the strategies that gets us out of this debacle we have with the Americans. We have to get as much value out of our materials and then look to diversify those products.
You have gone from on Cat 4 that used to be Cat 2.
That's right.
But the value added, and it was curtailed substantially by Gordon Campbell when he was the premier.
Because he used to have the small business program back then.
Small business program that had stimulated investment. And so then the allocation initially was 600,000 cubic meters, which doesn't amount to nothing. It's not as much as even a single mill would use. How can you stimulate the industry? I know you have doubled it. I'd like to see it go further than that. And I know you would do that once you get the exposure to it, because that's what it takes. But I'd like to hear voices from the value-added sector that are willing and able to speak up about these issues.
The value-added sector is the most vocal sector in our forest sector.
Right.
And I don't say that as a way of criticism, because they should be. We have to get more value out of our lumber. We cannot be a province that just makes 2x4s and 2x6s.
No.
That's crazy. And so I think of the success stories of Ken Klesnikoff, who came here with very little, similar to you, and has built an incredible success story. I think of the work that's happening on the coast with the Power family in terms of the work. I met a guy, 30 years old, John. I'd love to introduce you to him actually at some point. His name is Jake Gardner. He did something pretty gutsy. 30 years old, he took, with the help of his family, decided to go and take the old Teal Jones facility in Salmon Arm. And he bought it. Put everything on the line, everything he owned, to buy that facility that had been curtailed, had been closed, and hired back the workers. And he is looking at value-added manufacturing. It's incredible. Like that story, I think of Jack quite often in terms of the tough days I have. I'm like, if Jack can put everything on the line and get to work, I can too. Our government can too.
And then other examples are the Gorman family and West Bank, that although they are tenure holders to a certain extent, but they have put a lot on the risk. And the entrepreneurship that was there still is there to a certain extent. But if we want to go forward from here, there has to be confidence on the part of entrepreneurs like me that wake up in the middle of the night, or the fellow that Gardner that you're talking about, middle of the night, wake up and saying, as I did, is saying, okay, Canfor, you want to shut down your mills? I'm prepared to buy it. I make you an offer on that mill. And then they say, no, that one, and then on and on and on and on. In the meantime, they become log brokers.
Yeah. Let me be very clear in terms of where I stand. If you have fiber and you're not using it, we're coming for it.
Exactly.
It should be used. It should be used. Because here's the issue. We talk about the threat of tariffs. We talk about the threat of Donald Trump. Wildfires is just as big of a threat as Donald Trump these days. No question about it. And so that fiber that just sits there, before a logger can get to it and harvest it, a wildfire will come in and just decimate it. In 2023, the worst wildfire season on record, we lost 20 years worth of harvestable fiber all across British Columbia.
Yeah, and then the other part, pine beetle, may be a different issue, but there was 1 billion cubic meters of timber was harvested in a very short period because they had to. But in the meantime, it increased the volumes in all the other things. But intensive forestry is critical. And it's not reinventing the wheel, as you well know.
Well, as you know, John, pine beetle kill, for sure, there were steps the government had to take. Yeah. But they opened the door, and they allowed people to get employed, which was great. And then as soon as the pine beetle kill ended, those jobs were lost, communities were devastated. Yeah. And so, I can be critical of companies, but I recognize that many companies have shareholders, they're business people, they have to make business decisions. It's a responsibility of government to stand up for those workers. It's a responsibility of government to stand up for those communities. And government has not done that. And I will.
I agree with you, Ravi, that once you get concentration of too few companies, half a dozen companies controlling 80% of the tenure in the province of British Columbia, once they decided to leave, and they are responsible to their board of directors, and I have no issues with any of that, but the tenure and the timber belongs to us, the people, and it's your responsibility and your government's responsibility to create the greatest amount of social and economic reward from that resource that is so, we are so fortunate in what we have. But I'm a believer in value-added manufacturing in combination with primary manufacturing. So I said, all these ones have to work together, but the model has to change. We cannot keep making spaghetti that nobody wants. And all of a sudden now we got a situation with, it's not only tariffs, and that's already obvious what is happening there, and hopefully something, the other investigation that they are doing, we'll see what happens. But and the other part that has been an issue is the duties. And at one point we had, as value-added organization, negotiating with government, the BC government as well as the federal government, negotiating with the Americans on for saying that value-added should be exempted, or at the minimum should pay on input only, on first mill basis, not on, no matter how much value you add, we will put a duty on the end value. That deters, further manufacturing.
Oh, without a doubt.
And the last go around, I think it was in 2016 when we negotiated the last agreement, is that issue was not even raised because that process was managed by Kofi and the BC Lumber Trade Council, and that issue was not value-added.
When I became minister, past practice was, you would go in and I think of the late John Allen, right? Who I know was a friend of yours.
A friend of mine.
Incredible steward of our forest sector here for decades.
Yeah.
In the past, government would appoint a single person who would go in and represent the sector. That doesn't work for me. It's not my style, and so I did something unique. I assembled a softwood lumber advisory council. First time ever, we actually have a value-added voice at the table. Dan Battistella, former president of the Interior Lumber Manufacturing Association. Dan gets it. He's been at the conversation, and I told him, I want you at the table. I want you representing value-added producers from all over British Columbia, because you have that experience. And we need to make sure. We have not gotten enough out of the federal government on this file. It's deeply frustrating. And so we need to get more out of the federal government. They need to make softwood lumber a priority. I hope we'll hear Mr. Polyev talk about that. He was in Nanaimo, and he stood outside of Western Forest Products mill and talked about crime and mentioned a little comment about softwood lumber, which I think was a bit of a slap in the face to forestry workers. Mark Carney's got to step up. Jagmeet Singh's got to step up. We have to ensure that forestry is a priority. If this was the auto sector, John, we'd be golden right now. And I don't want to make that comment because the auto sector is going through a significant challenge right now.
About that,
but why can't we get the same focus on the forest sector from the federal government as we do with the auto sector? It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I agree, Ravi. Make sure you have northern representation on those particular tables, because that's kind of in the past what that happens. It gets dominated by Kofi and the BC Lumber Trade Council, and they are all part of the control of those companies is still by the same 3-4, although they are investing elsewhere. And there are a few people that have the knowledge and that are ready to speak up on those tables, and that's important for government.
I've loved getting the chance to travel this province. There are so many good people out there in communities all across the province that are not coming to complain. They want to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
They want to be able to help me. I don't come to this role with decades of experience in the forest sector. I feel like one of the assets that I have is I bring an absolute fresh perspective. And I know that as part of my work before one should act, I always learned this from John Horgan. Before one should act, you should be doing a lot of listening and learning, because you want to make sure that everything you make as a decision is founded in what you listened and learned on the ground. And it's been incredible. There's so many people. I think of Bill, a person who has worked his entire life, 48 years, at the Gorman Brothers Mill in West Kelowna. Yeah. I was giving him a hard time. I said, Bill, are you going to make it to 50? And he's like, oh, well, the knees after 48 years don't really align. But when I think of the Trump tariff, that is not just a decimal point. That's an attack on a guy like Bill, who's been doing his level best to provide for his family. I think of Jack. I think of the incredible civiculture practices that we have. I was out in the bush. It was a big priority for me, because I think, John, the future in terms of the workforce is in the bush. Yeah. I think we can have people planting trees, doing reforestation, doing commercial thinning, selective logging, partial harvesting.
It's like farming.
You name it. Exactly. Exactly. That's the future.
Yeah, that's the future. And it's being done in other places, like Sweden, Finland, Chile, in South Africa, all over the place. It's being done like that.
And we got to do some work here in BC to make sure that we change our pricing system, our tenures process, to allow for that.
And too much bureaucracy to a certain extent.
For sure.
We don't want to have Elon Musk with a power saw, but still we have to make sure, as you already said, rather than having permitting 45 days, bring it down to 25.
I asked my team to print out, because I want to see this, the amount of paperwork for just a simple cutting permit.
Yeah.
It's a lot of paper. And I told them, I want you to take a red pen and I want you to help me cut this down in half. That's just a start. And that's the work that we're going to do. We have to streamline these efficiencies. We have to get fiber flowing. And again, my number one focus as I do this work is to make this the most people-focused forest sector British Columbia, Canada, the world has ever seen.
Ravi, you have a busy day today because the Premier is
I feel
here.
Like we were just
and
getting
you have
started.
Other meetings, I know, and we need to need more. I want to be part of your team. I want to be available to you whenever you want. You know what I believe in. I believe you a document here. This one is based on 2021, and I'll give you 2 copies.
Oh, thank you.
You don't have to read it right now. I made it available saying that's what I see that we have to do, and that was done in 2021. It always follows the same. So I think for all those people watching us from around the world, here we have an example of where a manufacturer like ourselves, relatively small manufacturer in this big, beautiful province of British Columbia, sitting together with the Minister of Forest of British Columbia, Canada. Can you believe it? And so in an interview where we are interacting openly, not structured other than to say we are into this together and we believe in it, and your background, your parents' background, and me as a nearly 85 years old, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stay. I'm going to give it all that I got. I will fight for things. I heard you say that at one point in government, you stood up and you got the position of it and say, I will not leave. I will not give up. I may fall down. I will stand up. I will fight for this province and believe in the forest industry and the beauty of this province. We are so fortunate as to where we live.
We sure are. Now more than ever, we have to be rooted in the principles of attitude, passion, work ethic, hustle, respect for the land, respect for the people,
And
lifting
working
people
with
up.
First Nations
Totally.
and with the communities and opportunity, and that's what I see.
John, thank you for everything you do. Real pleasure.
Thank
Let's
you.
do this again.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, thanks, Ravi.
You bet.